Speaker.
The Honourable Kekia Parata, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe e te mana whakawāhuri no I tō tātou whare I tēnei ahi tēnā tātou katoa. Mr. Speaker, our John Key-led government is investing in a growing economy. It's a growing economy that is able to generate more jobs and higher wages, a future that's based on a modern approach which is about science and enterprise and entrepreneurial behaviour. It's also based on a hallmark of national governments, which is to have a compassionate heart for those most in need and do something about it rather than talk and wring our hands and cry crocodile tears. It is to do practical things, and we get to do those practical things when we have an economy that supports that. So it's pretty important that we grow the economy, that we invest into that, and we do so in a future-proofed way, Mr. Speaker. The budget is an important mechanism for telling the country in a comprehensive way what the business of government is. And it is important that we do tell the country what the business of government is, because it makes up still too big a part of our economy. It is not the economy, which is something we understand, although the opposition clearly fails to understand that almost pathologically. The opposition thinks it's the government that creates jobs. The opposition thinks it's the government that earns the income. It is not. The government's responsibility is to ensure that it creates an environment in which New Zealanders can be successful, through which we back New Zealanders to make good choices, to be powerful actors in their own lives so that they are not dependent on government. That's our long-term vision, and that's what this budget, the 8th budget of the Minister of Finance, continues to invest in. And I want to acknowledge the Minister of Finance, the Honourable Bill English, for the magnificent job he has done over 8 very challenging years. Yes, we have heard already about the very parlous legacy from the opposition, and I'm not going to rehearse that because, as the opposition has rightly pointed out, we are not here to talk about them because there's not much to talk about. So I'm going to talk about us. I'm going to talk about this government. And I want to acknowledge the Minister of Finance for the fine work that he's done, because not only are the appellations of prudent and conservative and sometimes pessimistic totally apposite, but they have occurred within the context of a strategic framework. We have a very clear vision of how we ensure we grow a productive economy, how we ensure that there is prosperity available to all New Zealanders, how we invest in an economy that is based on science and on knowledge, that it is future-focused and not backward-looking. And we can see, within our budget that we now will have choices that would otherwise not have been available to us.
37 is national.
So the government's investment or its business makes up about 30% of the economy, and it's really important that we are both efficient and effective given that size. We need to make sure that we get every bang for the taxpayer's buck we possibly can, and that we can measure the impacts, that we are actually getting results. We're not simply doing, as the opposition keeps wanting to argue, that the more money you put in, the more it shows you care. Actually, the more practical the results, the greater the impact shows how much we care. And on that basis, this government has a very good record. It is by no means enough, but that's the direction of travel, and it is comprehensively set out in this budget. And we have a plan, Mr. Speaker. Our first is that we want an innovative New Zealand. We're a small country, 4.5 million and growing. We're small, smart, sassy, and we punch above our weight, and we continue to wish to do that. I've recently returned from Crete, where I went to, along with the Governor-General, to commemorate the 75th Battle of Crete. The point of that was that New Zealanders, 7,700, went all the way around the other side of the world to fight for the principles we believe in, of democracy, of fairness, of looking after those who cannot look after themselves, while all also growing the possibility of prosperity for all. Now, we are seen by the rest of the world as very credible international players, and the more that we invest into our own science, our own skills, the growing of our economy through leveraging off our primary industries, through growing our information and communication and technology areas, the more we continue to have weight in that regard. And we've continued to invest in infrastructure. It doesn't sound very sexy, but getting from A to B to C on really good roads, as we see around the country, is pretty critical to the businesses of New Zealand and the flow of that work. And in the education area, of course, we have benefited from that enormously because we are the single biggest investment in this budget at $882.5 million for new schools, for role growth classrooms, for redevelopments, because schools or the places of learning really do give substance to this idea of how do we grow the economy. And in education, we have a plan that supports what I've talked about generally in terms of our approach to government. And the plan is that every kid is educationally successful. And we haven't just talked about it, we're overhauling the 27-year-old Education Act. We're reviewing funding because this is the single biggest amount that's gone into education ever, $11.04 billion. Education is bigger than police, bigger than foreign affairs and trade, bigger than roads, bigger than police, bigger than conservation. And that shows how serious this government is about how do we build our kids to have the skills they need, the qualifications, the technological capabilities to participate. We want to make sure that we have successful and effective teachers. We want to make sure that they have a very independent profession, which again is something the opposition seems incapable of understanding, that when I say the Education Council is independent, it is independent. It gets to make its own decisions about how it raises the quality of teaching and leadership. We are configuring communities of learning because we understand that the whole pathway of the student is critically important. We've provided more pathways, applied learning as well as academic learning, so that every New Zealander has the opportunity to go into the trades, which of course we need more of because we have an economy that is growing. In this budget, we've invested in infrastructure, in science and innovation, in health and education. I don't need to talk about health a lot because we will hear later in this debate the comprehensive investments we are making in health. And in addition, of course, we have the social investment approach, which is very specific. How do we change the trajectory of young people who otherwise might lead a very poor life? How do we invest early with impact to make the difference? Not only do we cut down the liability of government, free up money to resource more in the productive side of the economy, but we help support better lives for individuals. And that's what this government is about, Mr. Speaker. We want better lives for all our kids, for all our young people, for all our middle-aged people, for those of us who are in that young middle-aged category, as well as those who are older. So this government is about quality opportunities for all, and education is a core part of that. We provided in this budget for nearly $400 million for early childhood education. Those of you who have been able to see in a distilled fashion Professor Richie Poulton's Dunedin study and understood that if we can invest early, identify those kids most at risk, make a change for them, they will lead better lives. And so we have seen in this budget, Mr. Speaker, that rather than provide a universal operational grant to schools, we have taken what that would otherwise have been and targeted to those kids who have spent 75% of their lives in long-term benefit-dependent homes. Because we have heard and understood that we need to prioritise those who are most at risk of educational underachievement. Now, we are not in the process sacrificing the rest of New Zealand students. Not at all, because the first $10 billion goes towards that. We want kids who are doing well to do even better, but we also, because this is the nature of this government, we want to pick up those who are falling behind. We want to give them the same chance at better life outcomes. Real kids, real results, real time. That, in a nutshell, describes education, but it also describes this government. Real New Zealanders, real results in real time, and Bill English's 8th budget delivers the economic and the business approach that will ensure that next year we will be able to report, because we have a transparent means of reporting, because we're prepared to be accountable, that we are making progress. But, Mr. Speaker, there is still a way to go. Thank you.
A 5-minute